2021, which was the largest military exercise in Sweden's vicinity since the end of the Cold War, with 200,000 Russian troops also practicing together with Belarus in joint command and control. And today, as we all know who are present here, we have a very volatile and uncertain situation towards the east. There is again another massive Russian buildup towards the border of Ukraine, which we will discuss. Around 100,000 troops are the estimates, and we heard yesterday NATO Secretary Jens Stoltenberg warning Russia against potential hostile actions against the backdrop of this buildup. We have the cynical use of migrants in hybrid warfare by Lukashenko along the Polish border. We will hear more about that soon. We have also heard over the weekend Lukashenko threatening to cut off gas supplies, transits to Europe, and he called for Russia to place Iskander missiles in Belarus, which can carry nuclear warheads and have a range of 500 kilometers. So this is a very tense situation that has evolved just in the recent few weeks, actually escalating. And there is a lot for us to discuss, of course, how should we perceive these recent actions by Russia, and what are the prospects to improve relationships between the West and Russia, or in the very short term, perhaps to get more of a control and de-escalate what we now see as very worrisome developments. But also, I hope perhaps we can spend a little bit of time on how to best engage with Russia short and long term, looking forward. And also, I hope that we can connect the dots. What we see here are potential energy crisis, migrant crisis, or whatever hybrid formats of warfare. How are these connected? We see Russia acting, we see Belarus acting. How are these connected? And how does it play out if we broaden the perspective? And what can we see? What kind of patterns can we see? And what do they mean for security for Central and Northern Europe? So with this just very brief words, I would like to give my co-hosts, Ambassador Joanna Hoffman, Republic of Poland, and also Judith Goff, Ambassador of the United Kingdom to Sweden, the opportunity to welcome you as well. So please, Ambassador Joanna Hoffman, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Good morning, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear guests. It is my great pleasure to welcome you to the webinar, The Russian Federation, Challenges and Trends Impacting the Central and Northern European Security. Russia's international policy, which has been more than assertive for many years, including the aggressive military actions against Georgia and Ukraine, is being witnessed by the international community with caution. External actions of Russia also include hybrid and cyber attacks against NATO allies and attempts to influence internal political process in some countries. In the first half of September this year, Russia organized the Zapad 2021 military exercises near the eastern border of the EU and NATO. Their limited transparency and wider context, as well as hybrid activities carried out in parallel, have raised our concern. And then on October 18, Russia announced that it had frozen formal contacts with NATO by suspending the operation of the Russian permanent representative at NATO headquarters in Brussels. At this moment, the migration and humanitarian crisis at the EU's external border, for which the Belarusian authorities are responsible, continues. Its purpose is to try to destabilize the situation in the EU following the sanctions imposed by Brussels against Minsk. Belarus is actively involved in organizing and increasing the migration wave and is managing the action to deliver the migrants to the border with Poland and the Baltic countries for illegal crossing. Taking into account Minsk's current relations with the Kremlin, it is hard to imagine that it would not have Russia's full consent and support. The Kremlin wants to permanently weaken transatlantic ties, undermine the trust of the societies of the member states in the EU and democratic institutions, and also wants to limit the EU's influence in the eastern neighborhood. The new Russian gas pipe, NordStream 2, serves as an example of the Kremlin's divisive strategy towards Europe. Russia also wants to destabilize the Euro-Atlantic security in the Baltic Sea region in order to regain geopolitical control over the Baltic states by rebuilding the sphere of influence. As a consequence of these actions, the sense of threat in Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia increases. In the area of security, Poland's cooperation with the Central European countries is constantly developing. I would like to highlight here two formats in particular: the Bucharest 9 and the Three Seas Initiative. Cooperation within the Visegrad Group is equally important to us. Ladies and gentlemen, the countries of Central and Northern Europe face the same problems and threats related to the activities of Russia and Belarus. As we assess the current situation in a similar way, the international cooperation of our region should be particularly close and intense in order to build a common response and resilience. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, I will need to leave you soon, but I wish you a very fruitful and interesting discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Joanna, for that. And we understand that you have a very busy time now with everything that is happening. And we wish you good luck with the developments also.
Thank you.
On this crisis situation. Then we have a greeting from Judith Goff, UK ambassador to Sweden.
Okay.
Good morning.
Can you see my screen sharing?
Yes.
Okay.
My name is Judith Goff and I am the British ambassador here in Stockholm. I'm delighted to welcome you to this conference this morning. The British Embassy is very pleased to be hosting this with the Polish Embassy and with the Atlantic Council here in Sweden. Really important topic that you will be discussing today. I'm so sorry that I can't be there in person, but this is a really important topic. As the United Kingdom made clear in its integrated review, which was published earlier this year, the UK is really committed to Baltic and regional security. We demonstrate that by being one of NATO's largest contributors and by the presence of our troops in Estonia and Poland through our participation in the enhanced border presence, NATO's enhanced border presence. We also demonstrate this with our leadership of the Joint Expeditionary Force, the JEF. We recently were very pleased to be able to have an exercise in Sweden with the 9 partner nations. So the UK is really pleased to be able to take part in this discussion. You have some great speakers ahead of you this morning, and we're delighted that they
I think maybe we lost. Did we lose the sound?
with our partners Poland and Sweden on these issues. I wish you all a very good stimulating discussion.
Thank you, Judith. I think we lost a little bit of it, but we got most of it. So a greeting from the UK ambassador as well. And now I would like us to move into the panel discussion and welcome our distinguished experts. I'm very happy and honored to have gathered this panel for this discussion. And I think you can find the longer resumes of each speaker in the invitation, but I would like to introduce them in the order that they will be speaking. So first is Gudrun Persson, who is Associate Professor and Deputy Research Director at the Department for Security Policy and Strategic Studies, Division for Defense Analysis at the Swedish Defense Research Agency, FOI in Swedish, Stockholm, based in Stockholm. And then we have Agnieszka Legutska, who is also Associate Professor and Senior Research Fellow on Russia in Eastern Europe program at the Polish Institute of International Affairs, PISM, based in Warsaw, Poland. And then from London, UK, we have with us James Nixie, who is the Director of the Russia and Eurasia program at the International Affairs think tank Chatham House. And all of you, a very warm welcome to all of you, and thank you for joining us here today. I will ask each of you to make around 8-10 minutes remarks on how you perceive the developments, and then we can follow up with the discussions. And please, the audience, you can start feeding in your questions in the Q&A, and I will take them in afterward, after the panelists have spoken and we have a discussion. So first, please, Gudrun, the floor is yours. How do you assess what we are witnessing now towards the East, and how does that affect security here in our part of the world?
Very good, thank you so much. I'm delighted to be here, and as has been said, it's a very timely seminar. Also because it's now 30 years ago since the Soviet Union dissolved, and it's worth remembering in this context that in December 1991, Ukraine, including Crimea, a majority on Crimea, voted for independence. So what I'll try to do is I'll give a view from my Swedish perspective on the challenges that Russia poses and how to address them, and to put the development into context. It's often said that Russia is unpredictable and adhocracy. It's worthwhile to analyze more closely the constants and the variables regarding Russia's actions. So I'll address first, what does Russia want? And then I'll jump into a few points on what it means for the West from my perspective. So what does Russia want? This is very clear. There are no doubts and no secrets here, nothing mysterious. It's often said, though, that Putin doesn't have a strategy, it's only tactics. But in the long term, the Russian objectives of its objectives is very clear. First of all, as we heard Ms. Ambassador speak about, the Russian sphere of interest should be acknowledged. The Euro-Atlantic security order needs to be rewritten. It does not provide security for all, as it says in the military doctrine of both 2010 and 2014. And thirdly, the authoritarian political system must be secured. And the changes in the constitution last year provide for that. The authoritarian political system is described as the right one for Russia, with a strong figure at the top. And this is feeding into the tradition of Russian great powerness. And the current political leadership often quotes Alexander III. Russia only has two allies, its army and its fleet. Now, we all remember the Chief of the General Staff, Valery Gerasimov's dictum of 2013, when he put the 4-to-1 military and non-military means. However, in 2019, he reminded everybody about the importance of the military instrument. So this 4-to-1, don't forget the one. It's important, and we see it as we speak, again, on the Russian-Ukrainian border. And Gerasimov has also said that a defensive operation can provide for preventive, active, offensive actions. So, and the dynamic we're in is very strong, and it entails repression at home and aggression towards the West. And all this is being framed and motivated as to correct historical injustices in Europe. And this, to my mind, means it will never stop. It's a Pandora's box in Europe. The Russian leadership defends and justifies the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, including the secret protocols and the invasion of Czechoslovakia in 1968. Values like the rule of law, freedom of speech, and human rights, according to the current political leadership, should be subordinated to the national interest of a great power. So, what does this mean? How much time do I have? Okay, I have 10 brief points. Although there are no immediate signs of a change in Russian security policy, but we all know that in the longer time perspective, change might come quickly. The important point here, as the latest Crimean War showed, there are no precise signs in advance. Therefore, the current development of doctrines and concepts in Russia, there is an emphasis on surprise, decisiveness, and continued strategic actions, which make it difficult to get clear indications of an imminent military conflict ahead of time. So, secondly, the sooner we realize what the situation looks like, much is already won. And the risks ahead are formidable. Russia thinks that the West is weak and continues to press on. And the West, at least somewhere, thinks that the Russia's position is untenable. And there's a risk here that the misunderstanding and the distrust continue in a downward spiral. Third, change must come from within Russia, from inside Russia. And this is a reality whether Putin stays in power or someone else takes over. Furthermore, the Russian view of security policy is holistic and involves such entities as the history of the state and the use of nuclear weapons, the whole span. We must understand what is at stake here and learn to take Russia seriously. The current Russian view of the West is that the West is a threat by its sheer existence, its way of life. And here is a dilemma. The Russia demand from West to recognize the authoritarian political system and the sphere of interest is something that Western democracies cannot comply with, cannot give Russia what it wants. Therefore, in pursuing a dialogue with Moscow, we must realize that the Russian political leadership does not necessarily want the same as we do. Also, Russia is creating uncertainty about its intentions and its actions, and use it as a security policy tool. Leaving the West speculating is an end in itself, creating possibilities to divide the EU and NATO. Therefore, what the West does do matter. We need firm, cohesive, and consistent policies Anything else will be seen as weakness. We have seen this time and time again over the last year. We must build knowledge over time. Much of Russian expertise was dismantled in the 1990s and after 2001. Now is the time to rebuild and keep, regardless of the security policy weather. And I'll stop there. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for that, Gudrun. I think that's a very useful way of starting to sort out here what we are facing, so to say. And I really take note myself of what you say, that Russia has a holistic view and we need to take them seriously. I think there is a tendency sometimes to watch Russia as being on decline and therefore weak. That's a logic that we often apply, and that's I believe what you are saying is that such a picture is not nuanced enough to understand and address Russia in a correct way. I think that's one thing that I would like to us to discuss a little bit more later on. So thank you so much for that, Gudrun. There is a lot more to pick up, and I will move on to our next speaker, Agnieszka. Please, you have had very busy times in Warsaw, Poland, these past weeks, but we are very keen to hear your perspective, both on that more acute phase and also your more long-term assessment of Russia. Thank you.
Okay. First of all, thank you for the invitation. That's a real privilege to speak with such a wonderful guests and embassies. That's a real honor. I turn on my clock not to be, to Russia, but I will try to be brief. First of all, I will try to also show in some points Polish perspective, but I would like to concentrate on three things. The reasons of this conflict or crisis that we are in, and especially in that time, we are witnessing just right now three types of crisis, at least. Energy crisis, migration crisis, and military crisis, perhaps new border to Ukraine, the new concentration of soldiers and armies, Russian army to the border of Ukraine. But I would, I'm commenting a lot in media because media attention to the border crisis between Belarus and the European Union is now very topic and hot. But I will tell you about it a bit later, because from my perspective as expert who deals with Russia for many years, I think that the main reason is the internal drivers for those crises. The main drivers are internal, to distract Russian audience, Russian people from the problems which are inside the country. And especially another element is the crisis of legitimacy. Crisis of legitimacy, I mean, Alexander Lukashenko has lost his legitimacy from 2020. We know it, and we elaborated. But already after the Duma election, we can see it's very obvious that also Putin is losing his position. The level of trust toward him is the lowest in the history. It's maybe from the Western's point of view, it's not bad because it's 33% people are trusting to Putin, but still it's the lowest one in the history of his whole ruling time. But so for that kind of regimes like authoritarian with even elements of totalitarian and dictatorship actions, especially about repressions, internal repressions, that kind of crises are distracting not only Russian and Belarusian audience, but also international audience from repressions which are going on, from the prisoners in Belarus and in Russia, and everything is very internal driver. So this is the first point. The second point is the Polish perspective, in the sense that I know that Russian and And sometimes also Western politicians are calling Poland as a Russophobic country, which is not able to have a dialogue or any constructive ideas about Polish-Russia relations or Western-Russia relations, but it's not that picture. I would say that we are maybe Russia aware of, maybe that would be the better of understanding, but from our perspective, the dialogue needs to be we need to have some preconditions for this dialogue, because as I said before, this confrontational attitude is from Russia side and Belarus side is internal driver because of the anti-Western approach is very popular, or at least it makes this popular in media and also political approach. So from Polish perspective, that without precondition dialogue is a mistake. And one of the examples is mentioned today, Putin-Biden meeting in June, when actually it was the reaction on the concentration of military in March this year. And after that, there was a summit with presidents of United States and Russia. And since few months, we are here with 3 additional crises, right? We have again the concentration of military in Russia, Russia-Ukrainian border. Again, we have energy crisis. I understand, and we should also know that Russia is only part of the element of this crisis. The Gazprom is monopolistic position, and also not allowing additional fuel go to European Union. And one of the elements is Russian action, not all of them, of course, but this crisis is on agenda, and we already know the game in which Russia is playing with to end the NordStream 2 with certificates. So this is the policy of pushing. This is the policy of pressure from Russia side. And now we are witnessing a totally new. From Polish perspective, crisis, which is artificial crisis, migration crisis, because Lukashenko allowed to come and actually invited people from Middle East, attracting them with the free visa regimes or visa for tourists. He was preparing this operation from many years, and actually the first victim was Lithuania, and then Poland from this let's say eastern border. So nowadays we are witnessing a huge tension between Belarus and Poland. But why Lukashenko invented this crisis? Because he wants to resolve on 3 elements of, or maybe put it in the different perspective. He's having the aim that we were talking about it before, that distract or destabilize the Western side. At least right now, it's not accomplished, because Western has shown, Western side, NATO side, and European Union side showed actually the consolidation around this crisis, which is good. But actually, also from Polish perspective and in Baltic states, we have negatively. We are having a negatively approach towards Merkel last call to Lukashenko, which was the first call. So Lukashenko is looking for this legitimacy to have bilateral contacts between not the European Union, but exactly above Polish head, which is from our history a very bad sign for European Union approach to Russia, because I know that my time is up, but probably we will have time to discuss it more about recommendation. And I really regret, because there is a very nice paper by Chatham House, How to Deter Russia. And it is like a playbook for, or toolbox, how to do it. And it's on the table, but actually we are not using it in our policy towards Russia. And we have advantages towards Russia, but Russia is perceiving dialogue without precondition, dialogue as such, as a weakness. So yes, they will test us again and again, because they do not see that they can stop at any moment. So I will stop here, and I will look for your input as well, and for the further discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Agnieszka. And that was a wonderful bridge then over to James, and a third speaker. You were waving here with the report that Agnieszka mentioned, How to Deter Russia. And I can hear, I mean, both Gudrun and Agnieszka speaking here. I think there is quite room to discuss a bit with you together then on what actions we actually should take. Because I often sit with the Russian experts, and there is one view on emphasizing also firmness and so on with regard to Russia, how important that is. But then when that meets politics, it tends to soften up, and perhaps does not always produce the ultimate mixture. But James, please give us the perspective from your side as an expert, and also from where you sit, London. You came with Integrated Review, where actually was pretty frank description of Russia as the most acute threat, as I recall it, for the UK. And what is your perception of what's happening, and how to move forward?
Yeah, thank you very much indeed, Anna and Agnieszka, for a plug there. I'll certainly refer to that, and maybe the bits about you were saying just there, Anna, about when politics gets involved, I suppose, in contravention of the evidence, if you like. So yes, greetings from London. Good morning, and of course, everyone sort of said everything by now. As George Robertson said, everyone said everything, but not by everybody. So I'll hopefully it's not too much repetition here. Look, there's all sorts of descriptions we've tried to apply to Russia over the years, but for what it's worth, the harsh reality, I'm afraid, is that this is clearly, an increasingly authoritarian state led by an illiberal, ultra-nationalist sociopath who means not just to undermine us, but who genuinely means to inflict harm upon us. Vladimir Putin, in his 21st year as president now, of course, believes not only in the slow demise of the West, but he believes in hastening it where possible. And so the fundamental problem is, and both speakers have already alluded to this, is that Russia's aims are inherently destructive. Putin just believes that Russia's increasing similarity to the Soviet Union, I'm not saying it's an exact parallel of the Cold War, of course, but Russia's increasing similarity to the USSR of 30 years ago, as Gudrun said, they believe it's a source of strength and vitality. Even though, of course, we all know it's not true, as your point is about Russia, getting weaker. Russia does punch above its weight, but it can do an awful lot of harm on the way down, and indeed it does. And so I think the Soviet heritage does sit quite deeply in Vladimir Putin's heart and mind, and we should bear that in mind. And remember, Russia was the only country out of all 15 Soviet republics that was unhappy about the fall of the Soviet Union. And that says something in and of itself. And the reason I mention all this is because what it means is that attempts to bring back Russia into the fold are doomed to failure. Because, over the years, we've had scores of leaders, foreign ministers, representatives of multilateral institutions start out by thinking they can crack Russia, that they can do what their predecessors failed to do, that they can be Nixon in China, that they can lead the path, that it's all mistakes being made, it's a misunderstanding, whatever it is, only to find themselves continually rejected, rebuffed, attacked, or humiliated. And it's an impressive trail of victims, it has to be said, that Russia has left in its wake over the years. And it's honestly, it's the triumph of hope over experience every single time. And hope is followed by disillusionment every time when they realize it just can't be done. And it's happened to our prime minister, and he is by far from the only one. So, because the questions in the blurb asked about the prospects for how to engage, you mentioned it yourself, Anna. I almost think it's almost like the wrong question to ask what are the prospects for an improved relationship. I mean, the answer is zero, but a good relationship, I suppose, like any kind of personal relationship, has to be built on something. You have to share interests and values as you do with your friends and partners and whatever. And we just don't share interests and values with Russia, and particularly with the Kremlin right now. So the reality is that it's not possible to accommodate or humor Russia's demands to what it sees as its great power rights to influence countries around it, at the same time as respecting the other country's rights to independence. Those two things are in contradiction to each other. So there's always this, there's this constant demand to, constant need to want to cooperate. Where can we cooperate? What are the areas for cooperation? Is a constant mantra somehow. But cooperation itself is is seen by Russia as a competition for advantage. That's what competition means. It has a different definition to the Russians than it does to us, as so many other terms do, incidentally. So I think we sometimes forget, or we're afraid to realize that the Kremlin is immune to ethical arguments, humanitarian arguments, juridical arguments, and it's really only affected by practical and pragmatic, realistic points of view. And they regard, as both speakers have said, the willingness to negotiate as a sign of weakness. It is not to say, I'm not trying to argue that we should isolate Russia. I'm trying to suggest that the way in which we have approached Russia hitherto, constantly, time after time, has been the wrong way of doing things. And we're desperate to look for areas to cooperate, be it on the environment because it's such a serious problem, or COVID, or even over China, and the last transgression, no matter how awful it is, whether it's radiological or biological attack, an assassination, debris in space, was it yesterday? Whatever it is, then it's pretty forgiven. It's pretty quickly forgiven for the pursuit of that, and Russia recognizes it can always tempt. It can always tempt Western counterparts with promises and offers of working together. So we just get played constantly. So I would argue, just very briefly, and I'll take. I realize I'm sort of taking up time for Q&A now, and I'll do this super quick. I would argue that we just need to adopt strategies based on a more honest appraisal of the evidence of Russia's capabilities and intentions. It's not hard. We just need to remember we're not Russia's friend. Russia's not our friend. It's not a partner. They may enjoy the West in some ways, banks and schools and property in London for sure. But they don't share its politics and its values and respect for rule of law. It's important not to accommodate and to keep our principles, not to appease Russia in return for assumed benefits. These don't materialize; they never do. And to, of course, to avoid the temptation of some sort of grand bargain, which isn't in our gift anyway, and wouldn't work anyway. Even if it were in our gift, that is to say. I think we just got to expect to be disappointed by Russia. Russia is, as we were saying in the chat, which I believe was heard by most people, there's a new thing every almost every day now, but certainly every week and every month if you like. And if Russia goes quiet, there's something. Russia hates to be ignored. It's the most important thing. Russia must not be ignored. So it's just. I think expect to be disappointed, as I say, and don't understand that treating it as a reliable partner in good faith will always end up in failure, unless, of course, it suits Russia's interests and unless there's substantial leverage, if you like, to enforce the terms of some form of agreement. Still, it's important not to give up and to be clear about core Western interests. And it's important to refuse to accept Russia's hostile actions and to keep faith that I suppose our political systems, tarred and tarnished that they are, do work in the long term, especially if we impose, what penalties and what actions we see to do, such as, but not exclusive to, such as sanctions. And so, as I say, accept the principle perhaps, but every unacceptable action should be if it's unacceptable, then that means it's unacceptable and should be met with an equal or an asymmetric reaction. And I suppose I would just close by saying that, sorry, two more things. One is to say, I think it's just very important to place security above economic gains. It's going to happen. Reduction in business from Russia is far outweighed by the costs of failing to deter Russia. And there are times when security and economic imperatives will come into conflict, and it will entail financial sacrifice. I'm afraid sanctions do indeed hurt the giver as well as the receiver. And the idea that financial investment really doesn't build political bridges unless the values and the interests coincide. So I would just say that honestly, we shouldn't be too worried about about a bad relationship with Russia. In fact, it's inappropriate to have a good relationship with Russia. If you have a good relationship with somebody, whilst they're stabbing you in the back, whilst they're putting malware into your computers, whilst they are, we've talked about the migrant crisis and the energy crisis, and the military crisis, as Agnieszka said, and it is massively inappropriate, frankly, to argue for where we can cooperate. When we have this, this really distinct problem, and there are so many issues in the world where, as I say, I referred to COVID and climate change, and there's rising China, of course, and there's Islamic fundamentalism, and there's Russia as well. It is, as you said, it's the most acute threat according to the integrated review, and I'm afraid we just don't have the luxury of ignoring any of these issues. Certainly not of Russia, not of any of them. I don't wish to downplay any of the others, and frankly, we don't even have the luxury of prioritizing. They're all incredibly urgent, deep problems, and we're going to have to be a lot more nimble and adept than we've ever been before. But I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, James. Now you can hear me. And also to the audience, please start fitting in your questions in the chat. I think we already got a couple of them. And I think one of them was related to what James just said a bit here on how to, his theme of how to cooperate, or what to expect of Russia. Can we change it? So we have a question here that I wanted to fit in perhaps as a follow-up question here, and Agnieszka and Gudrun can fill in as well, but from Heinz Sjögren, how to improve or change the situation. Now, James, we got your message that you're not very hopeful, but perhaps if it's possible and somehow to change it, suggestions here: more contacts, more tourism, more personal contacts, more interaction with people in all levels, more business, etc. Could that build up a platform for more democracy, more liberal ideas, more internal demands for a fair society, and abolish the visa regime is one suggestion here. Since we are on the topic, James, would you like to comment on that? And then if you want, the other ones want to, you can also.
Sure.
Yes.
I mean, as I think I said, I mean, we shouldn't give up hope. And there are absolutely things we can do on the positive side, as well as, if you like, on the deterrence side, which is what the question seems to be saying. And I don't disagree with that, by the way. I mean, more personal contacts, cultural exchanges, scientific exchanges are still doable. So most of those ideas, I think are pretty good. What I am unfortunately saying is that that's not going to change the aims and ambitions of the people running Russia. And because the people running Russia are, honestly, they're extreme nationalists. And so, I wouldn't deny pharmaceutical drugs to Russians. I mean, that makes no sense. I don't want a single housewife in Voronezh not to be able to afford a washing machine and to be blamed and to blame the West because that's the disinformation that's been fed to her, that it's the West's fault. So obviously, it's important as much as is possible not to turn the Russian populace against us, and that's to be honest, that's to a certain extent working, because I think a lot of Russians, as we've seen of late, are losing faith in their government. It's increasingly hard for them to keep control, in spite of a successful, from their point of view, Duma elections just a couple of months ago. It's just that for all of the quite honestly, the suggestions made by that speaker are kind of low-hanging fruit. And I'm not suggesting they're bad ideas; they're perfectly reasonable, but it won't change the more fundamental problem of a diametrically opposed visions of the world order, which unfortunately entail because Russia sees the world in these zero-sum terms. Even if we don't, then I'm afraid it's zero-sum, because it only takes one to do that. So I don't disagree particularly with the questionnaire. Maybe I'd quibble on the visa regime specifically. I think if you abolished it, I think there'd be some problems if you abolished it altogether. But by and large, that's reasonable. It just doesn't solve the fundamental problems of the political fallout.
Thank you. Agnieszka, please.
Agree with almost everything, but also I think the key to understand this problem that we as the West are trying all the time to improve our relations, and Russia doesn't have this aim, doesn't have to worry about it. So they are doing bad things, and then we are trying to improve it again and again, and something like very weird circle. But definitely what was pointed by James, that we need to understand the reasons why this kleptocratic regime, those oligarchs around the Putin, are thinking in the way that they captured their country and also their citizens. So any personal contacts, any cultural contacts, educational contacts, because there are also a lot of Russians which are not happy with the system. So either they are leaving, or either they are now in prison, or they are under repression. So our strong support, I know that it's maybe in the European Union is a slogan, but it's really working. I'm working with such a wonderful people from Russia, and they are really making a great job in Russia, and with contacts with Russian society, Russian media, independent media, especially now, because as I said, it is driven internally, this anti-Western approach. So also we need to have contacts. We need to improve the situation from its side.
Thank you. And let me see, Gudrun.
Yes, just very briefly. What we shouldn't do is to try to solve problems that Russia creates. There's always this urge that, we want to fix it, and we want to press certain buttons from the outside to get a good outcome in Russia. And we should just stop doing that and stand with both feet on the ground. And whenever this question comes up, I have a quote by the philosopher Isaiah Berlin, who wrote in 1946, and he said the following: Russia is ready to take part in international relations, but she prefers other countries to abstain from taking an interest in her affairs. That is to say, to insulate herself from the rest of the world without remaining isolated from it. And I think that's very valuable to keep in mind when we are trying to solve Russia's problems. As I said, change must come from within Russia. Only Russia can solve Russian problems. And I also agree, to have exchange, tourism, research, trade, as much as we can. Absolutely.
So keep the doors open to civil society, but don't expect too much on the regime level that we can influence. Exactly. System change. We have a range of very good questions. I thought I'd collect a few, and then we can go back to the panel so that we have time to go through them all. We have from Martin Krag a question here on, in Paris and Washington, you can hear ideas that the West should embrace Russia to nudge the country away from China, a reverse Nixon. What are your thoughts on this? And that's very interesting. I'm also keen on hearing your views on this talk on a potential Russia-China alliance or new relationship. And then we have another question on what are your predictions in relation to future Russia actions in Ukraine in the near future, as we touched upon in the introduction now with, I assume, with the massive troop mobilization. And then we have a question here on Russia and Putin being authoritarian from Yanni Salinen, and the second question was from Elzbieta Casa, sorry. And then from Yanni Salinen, Russia and Putin being authoritarian might have its gains against liberal democracies for several reasons, such as quicker decision-making or military action, hybrid warfare, and so on. But what would the panelists argue are the main strengths of the West against the Russian constant aggression? So we often see Russia's strengths, but what are our strengths in relations to Russia? And then there was a fourth question from Eric Adamson on EU defense ministers are meeting today in Brussels about the situation at the eastern border. What measures are Poland expecting Brussels to take? I know you're not a government official, Agnieszka, but what's the discussion in Warsaw? Can you give us perhaps a feeling or your own assessment of, what would be a good step to take? EU defense ministers are meeting today. So going back then, who wants to start? You can comment on all or a couple of them, you can decide yourselves. But we have both the Russia-China issue, we have Ukraine in the short term, we have what are the strengths of the West towards Russia, and then the last question perhaps mostly for Agnieszka on Brussels. But any other good ideas from the other ones on what to, I will also want us to go into a little bit more on the connection between, what's happening in Belarus and the connections to Moscow, Russia, because of course we heard Putin rejection all accusations that he has any stock in this crisis. And furthermore, also that we should not be worried at all about any forced movements around Ukraine. Russia poses no threat to anyone. So who wants to go?
I can go on the Russia-China account. Yes, it's very often heard in the West that we should do this, but it misses the point. I mean, the point is that Russia and China are already together in some sense. It's an interest-based cooperation. It's been developing over the years and deepening, not least within the defense cooperation. So that the idea that the West or Europe should open its doors, so to speak, to Russia in order to wedge something in between Russia and China is flawed. It's essentially flawed to my mind. It wouldn't work. Prediction Russia-Ukraine near future. I mean, it's dangerous business to do predictions, but at least I will say that we have seen over the years and also this year that Russia is willing to threaten with military force. And as I said, to leave the West speculating is an end in itself. So we can expect more of this, would be my sort of lame prediction on that. And on Belarus, I mean, even the Russian leadership has acknowledged that they are in close contact with Lukashenko on what's going on. So they more or less admitted that they are, fully aware, and given the current status of the relationship between Russia and Belarus, where Russia has increased its presence on all levels, political and military and economic. So even if Russia didn't come up with this idea, they have at least supported Lukashenko, and as Agnieszka said, this has to do with the domestic situation. And also they let their airspace open for the planes coming in, so they facilitated this, and I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you. Could I go to James or
Sure.
Wondering a bit also on the question is a bit on the strength of the West. I think that's
I'll have a crack at a couple of those for sure.
Just being depressed about our own.
Yeah, no, look, I mean, it is, you know, there's that sort of old, slightly hoary old saying that Russia plays a weak hand strongly, we play a strong hand weakly, perhaps, and and quite clearly, we do have strengths. Most obviously, their economic strengths, which is why we use the sanctions tool, and our sanctions tool is more effective than Russia's sanctions tool, but because of that. And so I think it is quite obvious that we also have a strength to a certain degree in unity. That may sound funny when Western unity is something we all crave and appears to be leaking with you know, the Hungaries and I don't know, the Greeces, the Serbias of this world, perhaps, who take a more sanguine, benign, or accommodationist view to these things. But actually, Russia, in reality, doesn't have any allies, quite honestly, in the international system, and it's obviously not a model that anybody wants to follow. And so I think there are certain strengths there we could play, and and the problem is that we do try to go to the lowest common denominator sometimes. And if that lowest common denominator is pretty low, if you're talking to, say, in Italy, and therefore I think that sometimes certain elements of unilateral action, which I have to say, and I say this as a devoted Remainer, you know, is actually doable in theory when you are free of some of the constraints of the EU. And I don't like to do that because, as I say, I'm a passionate Remainer, not a Brexiteer. But I think it's going to be interesting over, you know, as far as my country is concerned, over the next few weeks and months, that to see the ways in which the UK can act with a little bit more freedom. Hopefully, one had worried before, you know, between sort of 2016 and Brexit actually happening, that the search for new markets would drive us into the arms of Russia out of necessity. But just listening to Boris Johnson last night, which presumably nobody else was, but I sort of was, and he was talking about the threat from Russia and then saying that we're going to have to sacrifice, you know, some fossil fuels in exchange for a more robust attitude towards Russia. And he has said in the past, Boris Johnson, I don't want to go on about, you know, the UK side of things too much, but he has said in the past that you know, it was as Foreign Secretary, when he did make that drive to Moscow and tried to sort of repair the relationship, he said that was one of his biggest mistakes. Not such a big mistake, mind you, that he's not willing to give peerages to oligarchs or to, you know, play tennis to the wives of Russian governors for £160,000. So obviously we still like the money rather too much in the UK. So we definitely talk a better game than we do because of our weakness for the money. But so I think as I say, I think the advantages, you know, ought to be in the financial sphere, and that's where the UK really needs to step up to the market, since we are sort of a principal center for the laundering of Russian money, which is so often connected to those in Putin's inner and outer circles. Just very quickly partly because he's a friend, on Martin Clay's question. Hi, Martin, it's really good to hear from you. On Russia-China, then I would say that I have to agree with Gudrun and say that it would be great, but it just won't work. I mean, these two countries have, you know, they've got a very durable partnership. It's lasted a long time. Xi and Putin are as close as any two Russian and China leaders have been. They've got sort of complementary economies. I realize that Russia's is slightly on the way down and China's is on the way up, but it interests, I mean, in tech and cyber and defense, and you know, and a certain ideological compatibility where they can use each other in the UN and other multilateral institutions. So I just think that you know, if I thought it would work, I mean, I'd be all for it. But I think I just don't really understand how we can prize these two apart. I can answer on Ukraine and Belarus if you want me to, but I fear I'm going on too long, Anna.
No, but I'm interested in Spita's question on, I mean, what you expect on happening in Ukraine.
Sure. I mean, just very briefly, then. I mean, I would say that, you know, Russia's ambitions towards Ukraine haven't changed one iota, nor has it made any concessions whatsoever. What has changed is the West fluctuates, of course, from Trump to Biden. You know, within the different European major powers, and so the West, you know, but Russia has not made any concessions whatsoever, and continues to explore the weaknesses in Minsk II, which are reported as a success because at least the fighting has stopped, and the desperation to stop the fighting, which is a sort of a liberal mentality, and we can all understand that, just means that Russia sort of takes advantage elsewhere. And I think that you know, ultimately that Russia would concede that Minsk II was basically written in Moscow and very much favors the Russian side, and the West has not been able to interpret Minsk II in the way that the Ukrainians would desire in terms of protection of its borders and etc. and referenda and elections. But as I say, Russia wants to, as a colleague of mine says, to either control Ukraine, or if it can't, it will to wreck it. So although Ukraine is kindred and brotherly in some respects, it's not so much as Russia isn't willing to do its worst towards it. And of course, now we have, I think, finally halfway into Volodymyr Zelensky's first, maybe only term as president, but certainly his first term as president, he has taken a firm line. He came in not wanting to do that. Again, trying to make concessions, trying to be reasonable. And has learnt the hard way that the Russians aren't reciprocating and will not make any concessions, and so we now see a very different Volodymyr Zelensky in the last sort of 6 to 8 months than we saw in his first couple of years. So I think, you know, on the other hand, you know, in a way that makes me hopeful for Ukraine in a way, because of course, you know, although taking Crimea was, you know, was tactical brilliance. Rather, you know, it's of course it's strategic madness because it's lost Ukraine forever, and Ukraine is never in a million years going back to Russia now. So I think the fact that and you know, it's so and Ukraine, obviously, it's, you know, clearly it's got its problems with corruption, with the oligarchy still, although there's some work being done towards that right now in terms of legislation and cutting down to size, and so I think actually, you know, although progress is halting or faltering, then one can be reasonably hopeful, just as one can be for Moldova, but, you know, not for Belarus. I'm not going to answer your Belarus question unless you want me to, but you know, you can at least see signs of tangible progress there.
Thank you very much, Agnieszka.
Yes. Okay. We don't have much time, but still, okay. I will try briefly to answer. I mean, to on one hand, agree with Gordon and James about China-Russia relations, because from Russia perspective, it is a strategic decision, especially. Also what I was pointing out as an internal driver, because the West is seen as a threat for these authorities, not only because of those elements that James put it out, that economic sanctions and etc., but also the idea of free election, of freedom of speech. This is something that it's a real challenge for the regime, Putin regime, and of course the Belarusian regime. From my perspective, I believe that those regimes are very connected. They are in some kind of asymmetric symbiosis because they are learning from each other, especially when it comes to how to deal with their own societies, how to move repression on, and Russia is sometimes copying those elements like law restrictions towards its own citizens, and also, okay, no time for this, but those regimes are very connected to each other, and especially when it comes to this border crisis, Polish-Belarusian border crisis, but more or less like European Belarusian crisis, that because of the huge dependence Lukashenko from Putin, I believe that there at least was Russia was informed and approved this operation when it comes to this migration crisis. when it comes to this question direct to Polish, what Polish side is asking, or we are expecting from this this meeting, I believe that I'm not representing the authorities that Anna said. Yes, I'm not. I can only tell you about these about the Polish people. How do they approach this very, at least from weak approach from others member states of the European Union. I think the very important message was made in Bild, this newspaper, that Poland Danke. You know, that was, I was even impressed how much appreciation from Polish people were about that. We are doing right thing. And the story behind it, that it's not the matter of Polish guilt, or it is a really artificial crisis managed and operated by Lukashenko. And these messages, which are going around the world, are very supportive. So what I would also welcome from Polish side a huge political support. And we were talking, but I don't believe that at this particular meeting will be a solved problem, because I think Polish authorities prefer to contact with NATO, also consider it NATO as a let's say the bigger threat for Russia, that Russia is more keen to respect NATO actions than Europeans' actions, because they preserve Europe as a weaker partner in defense and security issues. That's why Polish authorities also lay on more on NATO approach. However, European Union, and especially last meeting about sanctions, was a very huge support to reducing numbers of migrants. Sanctioning, I mean, even saying about sanctioning airlines has made a huge impact. Turkish Airlines stopped transporting people to Belarus, and then Belavia, the Belarusian airlines, had to do the same, and Syria and Iraq. Why we are looking for reducing number of migrants? Because we can see and observe that they are becoming hostages, as Belarusians as a nation became a hostage of Lukashenko, and now those migrants who desperately looking for the better life, they are becoming a hostage of this regime. So that's why we need to looking for the resolution also from the, let's say, source in the Middle East and etc. And also maybe I will reply to this last question. It was not read out loud, but how do we consider to be a so-called new Europeans? I would say that this is one of the
sorry, yes. I want all of you to answer that last one.
Okay. Okay, so I will stop here.
Yes, exactly, because we have a few other questions, but I want to Algimantas Rincuna's question for all of you for the last question, because I thought it was a really good one. He says, a few days ago, Lavrov, speaking of the Baltic states and Poland, called them the so-called new Europeans. The so-called new Europeans. He said it was difficult to talk to these countries, so Russia would talk to real European states. The following talks began yesterday. Macron, Putin, Merkel, Lukashenko. What do you think about it? So I think this is also about strategy towards Russia. And I thought it could be the final very short round. We don't have much, but each of you 1 minute on what you think about this strategy. So Agnieszka, we'll go back to you, and then perhaps the order.
Okay. That kind of actions will be like playing the Putin's game, because actually this is the main goal for Russia when it comes to all those crises, and Russia is love this, prefer this role, double role. On one hand, being close to the negotiation table with the biggest of this world, the better world, the respected world like France, United States, Germany, and others we can like lose their position. They doesn't matter. On the second hand, they under the table they are supporting all the separatists in Donbass, all the spoilers in the world like Lukashenko, Assad, or ever. So actually, this is the, let's do not play with the Putin's game.
Thank you. James?
Nope. Yes, absolutely. Of course, it's no surprise. Well, firstly to say, of course, that Lavrov does a very good line in belittling, of course, and he is a very experienced foreign minister, and he's been there for, what is it now, 16, 17 years, and it's just a shame he plays for the dark side, really, rather than the good guys, because he's very good at his job. Whereas I suppose, you know, in my country, I think we've had 5 foreign secretaries in 5 years, so there's a slight mismatch, I think, in abilities there. I'm sorry to say, but to the question, and incidentally, it's interesting that he mentioned Merkel, Putin and Macron Putin, and that's where he has achieved probably the greatest success. Maybe he thinks that the UK has left Europe as well, when in fact, of course, it's just left the European Union, because we do contribute, as you and I think Judith mentioned in her entree, that we do contribute to troops in Estonia and to our Eastern European partners as well. So I think, you know, unfortunately, that is what has worked in the past. Merkel has, I'm afraid, is particularly in her sort of twilight years, you know, conceded more than she has gained. And Macron, frankly, started out and has not fully, you know, resisted the Gaullist temptation that France can make gains in ways in which, you know, everybody else has failed, as I say. So I think it is unsurprising, but and of course the Eastern European countries, or the Central European countries as well, you know, they're thought of by many as being Russophobic. But the reality is of course, they just have greater experience. They have greater expertise, and they're more greatly affected. You know, and we're relatively insulated here in the UK, except in the financial sphere, where we're more penetrated, I'm afraid. But for the most part, of course, we're an awful lot safer. Russia's not about to roll over tanks, and I don't think it's going to roll over tanks anyway, as it happens, even though it has done so, and it has got a record of doing so. Except perhaps Belarus and Ukraine. We'll see what happens there. But the reality is that you know, if you take, you know, just taking Macron's predecessors, for example, you know, in the Georgia War of 2008, he presents a 5-point plan. The Russians accept it, and then they ignore each and every single one of them. So, you know, these leaders have I'm afraid, have a history of succumbing and being twisted around Lavrov's finger, and you know, although Merkel is, I think, has been more adept and intelligent than most with her experience and linguistic skills, then I'm afraid, you know, she still ultimately failed, and the belief that, you know, Putin can be talked to and reasoned with, you know, is sadly, along with NordStream 2 itself, is one of the great failures of her chancellorship.
Thank you. Last words to Gudrun.
Right, on Lavrov, I came to think of, was it Rumsfeld who talked about old Europe and new Europe? So it's a sort of a bad mirror image of that, and it's I mean, obviously true to form, a Russian way of trying to drive a wedge within the European Union. So I think that's fairly clear. And on the talks, Putin and Merkel and Lukashenko, I tend to agree entirely with what James and Agnieszka said on that. I don't see any prospect of a success for the West in this, only more concessions. So on that happy note.
Yes. Well, thank you so much. Time is running out. We could have spent much more on it, and I'm delighted also that we had a lot of questions and exchange in the chat on this discussion. A very rich and enlightening discussion, but also I think we managed to touch upon what drives Russian actions, try to understand it a bit better, and in order to, I think what all of you say, I think there's a need to raise the bar when it comes to Western strategy towards Russia. We are staying united, but we are staying united on a pretty low level, which means that we often a bit behind, and Russia kind of tends to drive the developments with the also advantage of using tactics that they are so skilled of doing all over. I'm happy that we have connected a bit of the dots, at least, also between what happens in Belarus, Ukraine, and the role of Russia. A pretty common threat assessment, if I listen into all of you here from at least this part of the world. And as you say, James, we are the one closest to Russia with great expertise on Russia and historical experience of dealing with Russia. So I hope also this can be spread to wider circles further away. So please, I want to thank all of you panelists, excellent contributions. I want to thank everyone who joined us today for being so active, posing wonderful questions. I want to thank the co-hosts, UK Embassy, but not least the Polish Embassy, who's been very instrumental in arranging and preparing all of this. I'm delighted that we got it all together. I wish you a good continuation of this day. We will follow all developments closely, and we hope for a reasonably good developments ahead. Everything being relative. So thank you all, and see you soon.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.